striding into court with his head held high. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak arrived to hear his verdict. Guilty on all 7 charges relating to the multi-billion-dollar 1MDB scandal.
As always, you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst.
It's the first of his 5 corruption trials, but even after the High Court handed down its ruling, he refused to accept responsibility.
We are always positive. We believe in our innocence.
About $4.5 billion was allegedly siphoned out of a national development fund and into the pockets of politicians and their associates. It's one of the world's largest financial frauds. This trial centred around the transfer of about $10 million of taxpayer money into Najib's personal bank accounts. When he launched the 1MDB fund in 2009, Najib promised it would drive Malaysian growth and prosperity. Instead, the High Court has found it served as a piggy bank to fund his extravagant lifestyle and that of his family and friends.
This guilty verdict is a landmark event for Malaysia because it is the first time that a person of such high political standing has ever been convicted in a court trial here in Malaysia over cases involving corruption.
Testimony included details of Najib's lavish shopping sprees, including spending $800,000 in one day at a jeweller in Italy. When Najib's properties were raided in 2018, police seized more than 280 boxes containing handbags, jewellery and watches, a haul valued at $275 million.
The 1MDB case damaged Malaysia's reputation, and I think today work towards restoring that.
He was handed a 12-year sentence and $49 million fine, but both have been stayed ahead of his appeal.
This is definitely not the end of the world because there's a process of appeal and we hope that we would be successful there.
In separate proceedings, Goldman Sachs last week signed off on a hefty settlement with the Malaysian government over its role in the scandal. The investment bank has agreed to pay the government almost $4 billion and in return, all criminal and regulatory matters will be dropped. But Najib's wife and several of his associates are still awaiting trial. So even after years of speculation, investigation and prosecution, the 1MDB case is far from closed. Melinda Nucifora, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Clare Rewcastle Brown in London. She's the founder and editor of the Sarawak Report, which first exposed the 1MDB scandal. Welcome back to Money Talks, Clare. So, 12 years in jail and a $50 million fine. You've been covering this scandal from the beginning for many years now. What's your reaction to what the court has found? Does the verdict go far enough? And will Najib Razak even serve his time in prison?
Well, I think the strength of the verdict and the tone of the judge's finding was very convincing. And I think that surprised a lot of people who had started to lose hope, really. There has been a recent political upheaval. The government that first brought these cases has been removed. And in fact, Najib Razak is part now of the ruling coalition in Malaysia. However, the judge, I think, had sat over this case for nearly 2 years, and those of us who followed it could see that the evidence was incontrovertible, really. He came to the right judgment. He found Najib guilty on all 7 of the charges that were being examined in this particular case. Of course, there are 42 charges altogether, and in fact, this was relative chicken feed in terms of the full amount of money that he is accused of stealing across these cases. This only represented $10 million worth of theft on the Prime Minister's part, and there's over $1 billion to go in the more hefty cases that are still going through the courts. So as far as him actually doing time, I think we saw a typical response from Najib. He still thinks he's going to get off. He's thought that he's going to defy he thinks he's impermeable, really, and will get off this. And he and his lawyer came out of the court and struck a confident pose, effectively demeaning the judge, accusing him of not being really very good, of having made all sorts of basic misjudgments. Najib's lawyer said, oh, well, I can't say he's dishonest because that would get me into trouble, and then went off and criticized the judge on many fronts. They think that they can string this out and get Najib off on appeal, particularly if they can continue to cause political havoc in the country, as he poses as a sort of innocent martyr.
Can I ask you now about the other big party that's been implicated in this scandal, and that's the Wall Street giant Goldman Sachs. A few days ago, the Malaysian government agreed with the banking giant that it would pay almost $4 billion as a settlement for its involvement in the looting of 1MDB. Now, we know the former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad was crucial in actually getting 1MDB to admit its fault. Do you believe this settlement is a blow for Goldman Sachs? Will it teach other banks, I guess, a lesson if they even consider being involved in funds that may have questionable ties?
Well, I think I have to sort of make a correction to an extent. There's been a misleading headline put out about this particular settlement, and it's to attempt to make it look as if Goldman Sachs has had to fork out more than they have. In fact, Goldman Sachs are merely putting their hand in their pocket to the tune of still fairly hefty, 2.5 billion. The rest of the money that's been written into this so-called $3.9 billion deal is actually a guarantee of returns of money that have been accumulated by the DOJ as they've seized assets in the course of their investigations. And that's contentious of its own because, as I say, Najib is back in the governing coalition. Many of the people who are now crucial members of a government that doesn't have a majority. It's a sort of it's a parliament that is evenly divided. So the ruling coalition now depends on a number of people who've been caught up in this and similar scandals. Goldman Sachs, by framing a deal where the money that was accumulated by the DOJ goes back to Malaysia, it is actually returning money to the regime that stole it. And there's a big question mark over that, whether the United States Department of Justice should be breaking its own rules by returning money to effectively the people who stole it. Goldman has had a slap on the wrist, but the previous government, the one that had brought the original action under Dr. Mahathir, were looking for 9.5 billion out of Goldman Sachs. I'm told they might have accepted 5 billion. They were going after them big time. So in many ways, Goldman's done not too badly out of this, given how massively culpable they are. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Department of Justice are still pushing for Goldman Sachs to admit criminal liability as part of any settlement they reach with the United States government. But Goldman are working very hard to undermine that as well.